Alrighty, well, welcome to my presentation on movements that moved a nation. This is my section 4 assignment, and today we are pretty much going to be going through social movements that occurred in the United States throughout several years. And the reason we're going over these movements is because they definitely made an impact on our nation. The way that protest movements work range in different varieties. We're going to observe three really big ones that happened in our nation's history. Now, when we observe these different types of movements, protest movements, we're going to see the different types of goals, different types of tactics, as well as success and failures seen by each protest movement. So it's very, it's very important that you observe it as an all-encompassing movement, not just something that had a positive outcome, but there were also a lot of downsides and a lot of struggles that occurred in between. The three that we're going to discuss include the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Protest Movement, the Vietnam War Protest Movement, as well as the Feminist Protest Movement. And each of these are outcries for changes, outcries for personal matters, just a huge development of wants and desires from our country. And we're going to observe each of these individually. So one of the movements that was really huge is the Civil Rights Movement. And if we look in these pictures, we can see one of the types of protests that occurred. And now when we talk about Civil Rights Movement, it's very keen to make sure to know what the goals are. For civil rights, we saw that it was a huge end for segregation. It was a huge urgency to want to integrate rather than segregate. Now, the ones that we're used to hearing throughout history include the African American Civil Rights Movement. However, there are also civil rights within Hispanics as well as immigrants that also cried for same rights, and they wanted just fair treatment. Of course, during this, there was another backlash from the majority Caucasian or white community, and that we saw primarily as an urge to keep segregation. So we do see that coming from a Caucasian or white perspective, but the civil rights movement, civil rights protest movement really focuses on the continued outreach for desegregation and independent rights for all ethnicities. So with that as one of the goals, there were several tactics that went underhand. Many people know Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King is known for his speeches as well as his protest movements with nonviolent acts. We do see a lot of nonviolent protests taking place, such as boycotting particular events, protesting through marches, or even speeches. And remember, Dr. King was a reverend, and when we think about church, sometimes we don't think of it as a place for a social movement to occur. However, it was one during the civil rights movement. We do see sermons and speeches being given to help kind of influence and suggest social rights and social equality. Some of these successes we do see obviously today through these protests and these various types of tactics used during the movement. We do see that desegregation did occur. Though not completely, we do see that the overall success was that desegregation did occur. There were laws that were passed, there were legislation that was approved to desegregate, such as desegregating schools to begin with, as well as public areas. Now, there were numerous failures. We see deaths, we hear lynching, we hear assassinations, and we hear abuse, jailings, just so much, demotion towards people that partook into these movement events. So we do see that as well. So if we look at the pictures, we do see demonstrations from Caucasians as well as African Americans. But also if we look at this list, we can also see letters that are being written, articles, and that's just another tactic. This article kind of laid out a few levels of wrongs done towards African Americans, ranking from 1 to 12, with 12 being the worst. And so that's just something to keep in mind as well. Further on in history, we do see the Vietnam War come into hand. And now when the Vietnam War came, many Americans first were on board with it as it was something pertaining to the nation's safety, pertaining to world safety. However, as it continued to grow on and on and on, we do see the American public grow very weary and, in fact, protest against this war that America is participating in. We see a lot of different things. For example, in this picture taken from the University of Wisconsin, we do see that there are protests going on campus, and we see these called as teach-ins. Colleges would have professors lecture on ways that the government's, benefiting from the war, things that the government's doing that is completely unjust. Seeing these graphic, images from the Vietnam War through media, through the news media especially, we do see a lot of, push from the American public to want to continue the war. In fact, there's a huge outcry to want to stop the war. So like I said, teach-ins was another tactic. And another tactic we see are different types of things, such as rallying. The local American public started rallying with congressmen, senators, legislative people that are opposed to war. And we do see that with McCarthy and his anti-war perspective. And we also think of media. Let's check out media. Right here we see music being used by John Lennon. And we hear songs that promote peace and equality, but we do hear it against, the Vietnam War. So let's listen. Okay. And it continues to go on to urge for peace as a chance. Our goal for the American public was to end the involvement of the American war. Though it did spread a lot of knowledge about what was going on, that was a success of this protest movement. We did spread a lot of knowledge. However, it hardened America about government. It gave it a very, urgency to not agree with the government, agree with our president's actions. So it did cause, the war to prolong for some time. However, we do see the failure of this as our trust in our government, as well as actually advocating the right for the Vietnam War to end. But we do see towards the end in politics. The feminist movement was also a search for equal rights. Women have gone generations and generations of not being treated equally. We see protests. As long as that, we see protests in the first picture. In our second picture, we do see a letter being written on an article written about women power and how a woman reader was very offended by the stance that the writer took. And now we do see, songs being written as well. The movement definitely got the word out about feminism. Feminism wasn't something at first, but now we see, women, becoming more involved with the workplace, involved with legislative rights, involved in, much more power authoritative positions. The protest movement definitely helped with that. It got the word out. However, there was a very failure with the action. We do see failure because, like I said, women were not taken seriously. They couldn't really be, taken by the public so seriously. So sometimes the movement was seen as a joke or something that's not to be taken full to heart. So what makes a successful protest movement? Well, one of the things I really love is Benjamin Franklin's quote. Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech. So pretty much I feel that a successful protest movement begins with an earnest outcoming. All the protest movements started with a deep insight for change. There's advocacy for change, and a lot of people found advocacy for change. And if the general public finds that correct, a successful protest movement comes with these different types of tactics. A variety of tactics come with a variety of results. The most successful we see is with everything. We see violent, we see non-violent, we see speeches, we see songs. The most successful protest movement we see comes from within the American public, to want an earnest desire for what is right. And these are my resources I obtained for this project. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. Thank you very much for listening.